Oh, it's showing me the time.
You started reading. Did you go read the word?
Right. Alright, we'll go ahead and get started. People are probably streaming it from lunch, but I'll go ahead and start. And just like the last time I gave this talk, I have to give you a disclaimer by saying that my research on this topic is very much a work in progress. At this point, I have just as many, if not more, questions than answers. And I'm sure you're going to have questions too. I hope I can answer them, and I hope that we have time to answer them. I feel sort of like I'm putting a puzzle together, but I don't know if the pieces will form a complete picture or if the pieces I'm working with even belong to the same puzzle. So I better get it sorted out quickly because I gotta write my pieces. Anyway. Is it? I can talk. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Do I need to be up? Volume up? Margo, do the tech things.
Oh, I gotta turn it on. Thank you. All right. Margo burns. Okay.
It's scrap.
Yeah, it's scrap. All right, let's get started. The Puritans didn't believe in magic. I embarked on a crusade for a wider and deeper knowledge of magic in Puritan New England, partly because I heard someone say this in front of a group of people at a local history event in Salem. And of course it's incorrect. And this was like a legit history event, you know. It was pretty legit. And I was just like, oh my God, I need to do something to counter that being in the universe. The truth is that the mental landscape of early New England was populated by an invisible world of angels, demons, ghosts, and witches. There's our friend Cotton Mather. And magic served as an explanation for otherwise unexplainable events and occurrences. Some more Cotton Mather. As we can see in John Winthrop's explanation of some bad weather in Connecticut that occurred at the same time as Margaret Jones of Charlestown was executed for witchcraft in Boston in 1648. Of course, she caused the bad weather. It's just not feasible that a society with the legal machinery in place to prosecute and execute people for witchcraft did not also harbor a widespread belief in the possibility of magic. And we can see the statute here from the 1641 Body of Liberties. In his 1992 book, The Devil's Dominion, Richard Godbeer supplied evidence that 17th century New Englanders not only believed in magic, they used magic to predict the future, to heal the sick, and to destroy their enemies, and to defend themselves against occult attack. This was a continuation of a tradition of folk magic that the Puritans brought with them from England. And it's important to stress the fact that English people practicing folk magic in the early modern era were generally professed Christians. There's no evidence for the existence of an organized cult of pagans in either colonial New England or in early modern Europe. These were people who were subjects of the Christian establishment who were accommodating much more ancient and innate magical beliefs. So it's not really that Puritans didn't believe in magic, it's that according to Orthodox religious teachings, the practice of magic by human beings was forbidden and strictly off limits to the truly pious and God-fearing. And there were two main reasons for this. Start with this guy, we're gonna go back to the 4th century. Sorry, guys. First of all, Christians believed that magic could only be practiced with the help of the devil. And this belief can be traced back to the writings of early church fathers, St. Augustine of Hippo. There's a little picture of him there. Augustine wrote The City of God to counter allegations that Christianity was responsible for the decline of the Roman Empire. And instead, he placed the blame at the feet of the pagans and demonized their religious practices. And here we can see Book 8, Section 19, titled, Of the Impiety of the Magic Art, which is dependent on the assistance of malign spirits. Pretty clear. The demonization of magic echoed down the centuries. Sorry, we just skipped like 1,200 years. I'll fill that in my thesis. Taking on an especially virulent tone by the time of the Reformation. And here's a quote by one of our 17th century MVPs. increased Mather. And here there are some such in this place that have gone to an ungodly fortune teller to reveal such things as cannot be known but by the help of evil angels. And here's a similar quote by Reverend John Hale of Beverly regarding charms and spells. They are but various ceremonies to invocate the devil, and that the effects following these charms, etc., are done by the devil. So it's all through Satan. And if the premise of a human selling themselves to the devil in return for supernatural powers sounds familiar, you've probably heard of Dr. Faustus. It's a pretty standard storyline. The second reason magic was forbidden to early New Englanders was that any manipulation of supernatural forces by human beings disrespected a cornerstone of Puritan theology, which was God's absolute omnipotence and control over the fates of men. And here we have increased Mather again. Mathers are going to show up a few more times. However, despite the admonitions of their ministers, evidence suggests that 17th and 18th century New Englanders used magic in their everyday lives. So today we're going to be looking at evidence for the practice of counter magic or apotropaic magic in early New England. It can be found in the documentary and the archaeological and the architectural records. I believe that's my thesis. Dusan Boric, he defined counter magic. This is a great definition of the word in the Journal of Social Archaeology as the powers attributed to symbols, images, decorations, objects, places, or practices that serve to protect from the harm that otherworldly beings and immaterial spirits, demons that inhabit the world, can inflict. So it's protective magic. Because most of the evidence I'll be presenting is physical evidence, we're going to keep in mind a couple of guidelines that were set by Ralph Merrifield in his sort of seminal book, The Archaeology of Ritual and Magic. One of those guidelines is archaeological evidence for ritual or magical activity consists mainly of objects deliberately deposited for no obvious practical purpose. And the second guideline, the ritual or magical element is recognizable only when it has been encountered a number of times. So no obvious practical purpose, patterns. Those are the two things we're looking for. We're going to start with some deliberate concealments, which is one form of counter magic. And a note on the dating. Dating these is extremely difficult. I've listed the date of construction of the houses in which the physical evidence was discovered to give you sort of a contextual time frame, but it doesn't mean that the ritual object or marking was left or made in that specific year. When I can confidently date something, I will, but that's rare. We will begin with concealed shoes. Thousands of deliberately concealed shoes dating from the 14th to the 20th century have been found in chimneys, walls, and roofs in Britain and Europe. Deliberately concealed shoes are also being discovered in North America and Australia. According to June Swan, who was at the forefront of this research in the UK, the shoe is the only garment we wear which retains our shape, indeed our personality. So the belief was that any evil spirit attacking the home would be confused and attack the shoe, which stood in as a sort of proxy for the person. That's what they thought. So this is really interesting. According to researcher Brian Hoggard in the UK, the earliest reference to a shoe as a spirit trap comes from the 14th century, when legend has it that unofficial St. John Shorn, rector of North Marsden, Buckinghamshire, trapped the devil in a boot. And this 15th century pilgrim badge, found in the 80s on the north bank of the River Thames near London Bridge, depicts the scene. And you can see him there trying to shove the devil down into a shoe. And if trapping a spirit, albeit one rather less menacing than Satan, inside of footwear placed near a chimney sounds vaguely familiar to you, that's because you do it every year. But I digress. So we're going to get started with some things that I've found here. Actually, I didn't find this newspaper clipping. A colleague of mine, when I was working at the House of the Seven Gables, did, and it describes the retired Beckett House, it being moved back in the, help me out, Ryan, 1911? I think it was 1911. And when they moved it, they discovered some shoes in the walls. And of course, you know, the person writing the article just thought that was weird. They didn't really say anything about why, just there's some shoes in the walls. That's cool. I think it's counter magic. Here's some from the Fairbanks house that you'll be hearing more about, probably about some shoes from Dan Neff later in his talk about examples specifically in the Fairbanks house. And that house is just full of them. It is crazy how much counter magic is in that house. But here's some shoes. That house was built, it is the oldest timber framed house in America, in continental America, right? something like
Yeah,
that.
North America.
Yeah, North America. These are some shoes that were found in the walls. That actual photo was by Dan. And here's another photograph of them. Two unmatched, oh yes, this is the same one. Two unmatched women's shoes believed to be from the late 18th century, found by workmen in rubble in the back of a massive chimney in Fairbanks House. That one was. And here is a couple from the, actually, yeah, I think it was two. The Hancock Clark House, built in 1737 in Lexington, Massachusetts. I think I have one more photo of those as well. They kept them in situ. Here's a couple from the, no, this is just one, from the Holton House in Danvers, Massachusetts, which was built in 1670. This was in the Historic Structure Report, reported these shoes that they found behind a chimney. And that's common to find it near a chimney because a chimney is a point of entrance. Based on the style, these shoes likely date to about 1770. These are my most recent discovery, and I'm really happy to have some Salem ones in here. I really know not very much about sartorial history. What does anybody in here kind of think they know what era those shoes come from? Maybe 19th century? Nothing? I'll have to ask Diana when we get back. So those were concealed in the John Dodge House, which was built in about 1794 in Salem, Massachusetts, so it's a little bit later. Dr. Baker's shaking his head yes. Here's some from Marblehead. John Adams' house, not that John Adams, a different John Adams. That house was built in about 1795. So you can see this practice goes into the 19th century. It's pretty crazy, probably into the 20th century. Here's some deliberately concealed horseshoes from the Pickering House, which was built in 1660 in Salem, Massachusetts. Those were found up in the chimney when it was being repaired in 1885. We all know horseshoes mean good luck. This is even more interesting. This was also found when the chimney was being repaired. It's a deliberately concealed hatchet, Native American hatchet. And I suspect that this is sort of an example of antipathetic magic where they thought putting the Native American hatchet in the chimney would actually keep Native American attacks away. All right, witch bottles. This is a very specific type of deliberate concealment. And they look kind of like this. A specific type of deliberate concealment, often a bellarmine or bearded man jug imported from Germany, packed with items like a witchcraft victim's urine, hair, or nails, and sharp objects, which are then boiled and then often buried. They were thought to work through the sympathetic connection forged between a witch and their victim. And this is a witch bottle found in Greenwich, UK, almost halfway full with urine. It also contained 12 iron nails, 8 brass pins, locks of hair, a piece of leather, pierced by a nail, and fingernail clippings. It's lovely. Only one such bottle has been found in New England, and that one was a little bit later. It was found in Providence, Rhode Island, and it contained 6 street pins. I don't think there's been any more found since then. Or maybe they've been found, but people just didn't know what they were. And we find evidence. We find documentary evidence of these witch bottles. Mr. Mather again. So documentary evidence regarding the use also, we see Cotton Mather here talking about it, but also shows up during the Quaker Lithobolia disaster in New Hampshire in the 1680s, which there's a book you can read about that by this man here. It's fascinating. But another example shows up in the Suffolk County Court records in 1681. So we know that this was something people were doing. If Cotton Mather had to say, don't do that, someone was doing it. Oh, this is an interesting one. This is also from that historic structure report of the Holton House, which was built in 1670, and is in Danvers, Massachusetts. They found this small salt-glazed jug, likely made in Germany before about 1720. It was found in the roof eaves that were closed in by boards installed in the late 18th century. I bet we would find traces of urine inside of that. That's my guess. We should find it and test it. All right, my personal favorite, ritual protection marks. This is what started the whole obsession for me. And these go back to medieval Europe, and there's a man named Matthew Champion in the UK who keeps several different databases of ritual graffiti that's found in churches in the UK. This goes back to the medieval days. When I was over in the UK last year, I actually saw some examples of that. This was in Canterbury Cathedral, and it's a VV, Virgo Virginum symbol. So we see this all throughout the Middle Ages. Now, Timothy Easton is he's the pioneer of ritual protection mark scholarship in the UK. And he did an article for the Institute of Archaeology in 1988. And this was sort of his example of the kinds of marks that we'd expect to find for ritual protection. So if you take a look at those, you can sort of compare them to some things that I've found. One particular type is Marian Marks, kind of like that Virgo Virginum that I showed you in Canterbury Cathedral. They're symbols that we think were meant to invoke the Virgin Mary. So now we're going to start with my discoveries. This is the Gedney House in Salem, Massachusetts, built 1665. There's a couple of pretty clear VVs. One is on the door leading up to the attic. The other is on a wall right when you enter the attic. Fairbanks House, sorry Dan, stealing your thunder. This is one that was found on some paneling. The house, like I said, was built in 1637, but the paneling is later. But another VV mark that I found. An R on a door in the Fairbanks House. This door, I believe, was 1800, I want to say. I think it's an 1800, so this is a little bit of a later example. But R for Regina, Queen, I think so. This is in the old York Jail in Maine, which was built in about 1720. And I found 3 of these markings. They look so much like Mason marks, like Freemason marks to me. And I got so excited when I found them. I felt like I was in a Dan Brown novel. I was really excited. I'm discovering these things, and it was just amazing. But I think they might be Marian markings as well. Another old York Jail, VV, same thing. This one is in the House of the Seven Gables in Salem. It's a St. Andrew's cross at X, and it appears to have some lines around it as well. Here's some more Timothy Easton from that same article from the Suffolk Institute of Archaeology. He's showing an example of some markings that were found, I believe, on a mantle. And the lower picture is of Jefford's Tavern in York, Maine. And I just thought they looked very similar to what he was talking about. You can even see a little circle up there. This one's really cool. These are demon traps on 17th century timber in Kent, UK. They were thought to, I guess the demon would be confused by the pattern and be trapped in it somehow. But I found something similar in Connecticut a couple weeks ago. I don't know if you can really see, but this is on a mantle, and it looks like one to me. It really does. And this is also Fairbanks House. Could be a variation of a Marian mark there. So this is the only real documentary evidence I've found for these markings. This is a broadside on witchcraft from Trier in 1600, and this is held by the British Museum. I didn't really dig around to find it. It was a UK scholar who actually brought it to the attention of people researching these types of marks. So if you look at the mantle here, the chimney, you look a little bit closer, there's a little mark right there. Kind of looks like an upside down V. Circular marks are my favorite. So we're looking for these types of marks. Timothy Easton says these are ritual. This is Roman. AD 190 to 212 approximately. It's in York. It was found in York, UK. So it's just sort of evidence that the symbol is so very old. Now we're going to go to some more recent examples. Here's one in the Clemmons Irons House in Rhode Island. The house was built about 1691. You can see it there. It's on the summer beam. Saugus Ironworks House, right here. Fairbanks House. You can see that. You can sort of see the petals here. Gedney House. Same deal. This was found. This was next to the chimney, next to the hearth. My favorite one, Gedney House in the attic. And there's a funny story about this one. I was looking all over the Gedney House for these marks. And I left, I found a couple good examples, I was happy, but I found out later that the tour guide there started talking about the marks on his tour, and he was up in the attic. And one of the people on the tour was like, "Are you talking about marks like that one?" And he turns around and he sees this perfect daisy wheel. And he's like, "What? Yes, I am." And I think that was the only room we didn't check the day that we were in the Gedney House. But I just, oh my gosh, this one is so perfect. Then it's in Salem. This is a great one too. The Jackson House in Portsmouth, 1664. This one's very elaborate. Looks kind of like the one that I have on my cover slide. Another Fairbanks house. Old York Jail. 3 circles in a row. 1, 2, 3. I think there was a 4th one actually too. Boardman House. Perfect circle on the mantle. These marks, we see them in burial grounds as well. This is the Deerfield burying ground, historic Deerfield. They're all over the place in this graveyard, just everywhere. And you probably know what happened in Deerfield was the really terrible Native American attack that happened there. I think it could have something to do with that. These are all the date from after that attack. So maybe families thought that their family members needed a little bit of extra protection. I don't know. A couple of 17th century chests. This one is in the Witch House in Salem, Massachusetts. You see several daisy wheels. I think there's another one down here. This was funny too because Elizabeth Peterson at the Witch House told me one day a woman was like laying on the floor staring at this chest. And she's like, what are you looking at? She's like, I'm looking at these daisy wheels. And we got all excited and geeked out over it. And the one next to it is at the Currier Museum of Art in Manchester, New Hampshire. That's a 17th century chest. So back to our good friend Cotton Mather. We already know that he did not approve the use of the urinary experiment, as he called it. And this is what he had to say about the practice of protective magic in general. Now, to use a charm against a charm, or to use a devil's shield against a devil's sword, who can with a good conscience try? This is from the Pickering House. It's a mirror dating from 1720. It belonged to Theophilus Pickering. He graduated from Harvard in 1718 and became an ordained minister in 1725. It's a beautiful artifact. But when you turn it around, you see a couple of daisy wheels carved right into the back of this reverend's mirror. So I think that maybe early New England's invisible world was so scary and imposing that even the most godly hid behind the devil's shield. And that's all I have for you. We have time for some questions. I went through those way too fast. Yes.
So this might sound like a silly question, but on the shoes, were they always men's or women's or both? And then also, were they ever in matching pairs?
Yeah,
or
sometimes.
Right or left?
There's databases of this in the UK, and June Swan has done so much analysis on this. She has like percentages of what she's found, and it's insane. So if you're really interested, I would suggest looking her up. But she's found men's and women's shoes in pairs, also just one single shoe, which I think is it's great evidence that it's ritual because it's just, one shoe. Children's shoes show up a lot. So there's one child's shoe I think I had in my presentation.
In England, is there, over time, is there a change in the prevalence and especially the use, or are there class issues that you might have seen happening here in this area as well? Did it become less prevalent, or was it more likely?
It moved out of the churches and into the secular sphere after the Reformation.
After the Reformation.
Yes,
So
you see those markings on these medieval churches. the Reformation happens in England. Henry VIII tears down everything and destroys everything beautiful. And then after that, you have the Protestant sort of more severe form of worship. It's not as ornamental, it's not as ritual. People maybe aren't really secure about exhibiting that kind of ritual behavior because it's popish and it's evil. So we start to see them in England, you start to see them in people's houses and homes in the early modern era after the Reformation, which is fascinating. And then of course here when they get here.
When do they disappear here? Do they disappear about the same time as they do?
That's a really good question, and that's one that I definitely have. I don't really know.
Gino, I can tell you one, the latest I've seen them, and I know there's, in Maine, there's a house that was built in 95 or 98, that they found a witch's bottle in, as well as other counter magic.
Really? I didn't even know about this. You'll have to tell me about this later.
Are you aware of the conference in Deerfield maybe a month ago?
Mm-hmm.
It was on churches and...
The architectural conference that they have. Yeah, I usually go to that. Why didn't we go this year? We should have gone. We go every year.
Somebody gave a paper on graffiti carved into New England churches.
Yep. Oh, really?
Yes.
Huh. I wonder who it was.
Well, you can...
Yeah, I'll look it up.
The research is for.
Yeah.
But it sounds right up your alley.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is the first year in like 3 years that I haven't gone to that. So silly. Thank you for that.
Daisy Wheels.
Yeah.
Rocky Hill Meeting House. Daisy
Is
Wheels.
there one in there? And there's so much graffiti
They
in
have a
Rocky
lot
Hill
of
Meeting
got
House.
Daisy
everything.
Wheels. And they've got pretty much
George
every other
Washington.
kind of graffiti in there too.
People's names, the ships are my favorite.
Yeah.
I love Rocky Hill.
My question about Daisy Wheels though is that they are really common on certain gravestone carvers. Use them a lot and into the 18th century. So is it possible that Daisy Wheels lost their
Yes, I think they did.
and just got to be
Became decorative.
decorative because it's really easy to make them with a compass?
Yes, I think so. I think you're bang on.
And is it possible, there's an odd gravestone, I'm gonna email you something about a gravestone, but I swear it's got VMs
Really?
on it
It's
over the lips.
ooh.
And yes, and an archaeologist said I'm reading too much into it.
Archaeologists say that. That's why Ralph Merrifield wrote that book.
That's why I emailed her because I wanted,
Yeah,
to make sure I wasn't way out there.
right.
And she suggested that it could be graffiti done at a later date,
Could be. That's the
But-
trick with dating these.
which is
tough.
true, but it's in the Forbes collection of gravestones, so,
Yeah, you'll have to email me about that.
yeah.
I'm very curious.
Hey, listen. So, to paraphrase Freud, while sometimes I think a daisy wheel is just a daisy wheel,
Yes.
but I also think if you look at all the 17th century, early 18th century gravestones, that you see versions of daisy wheels, versions of whorls on, and also on the furniture. I think it's really clear that some people, and some good Puritans, wanted to put protective magic on the gravestones.
Yeah.
And the only way they could do it was to intersperse daisy wheels with whorls, or to basically, I think, because if you just put straight daisy wheels and things on it, the nurses go like,
Cotton Mather's
"Cotton
gonna
Mather's
find you.
gonna be never."
Yeah, he's not
But
gonna be
if
happy
you
with
but
that.
if you start changing the motif,
Yeah,
oh, I
graven
see, that's
images.
just a decorative element there, it's not a
way
counter.
graven images saying you're putting the symbols on the gravestone, but you can't put them in your
Yeah.
church.
And the other thing too is, I mean, I think they're also used protectively well into the 19th century.
Going back to Roman times, as I thought.
Well, question
Yeah.
of the
No, it's okay.
sorry, Pennsylvania Dutch
Yes.
counter magic duck symbols.
Mhm.
Is there a link between these?
I think there might be. I was reading about Pennsylvania Dutch yesterday. I haven't read enough about it. But I mean, as we can see, that symbol goes back to Roman times. It's very, very universal, it seems. It's probably, Brian Hoggard thinks it's a sun symbol. It just goes back to being sort of a symbol of the sun. And I think they could be related in some way. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm familiar with the concealments and markings in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really know about them here. I think you said that it's only recently been investigated more?
It's been pretty big in the UK since the 80s, but it's
Here.
more recent here.
Like when?
Probably the 2000s, would you say?
Mm.
Yeah, there are a couple dissertations in, I think, Indiana. One was in Indiana, Chris Manning. So it's pretty new over here. Mm-hmm. Any more? Is that it? Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about like the difference and overlap between magic, counter magic, and witchcraft? Like, are they relatively interchangeable terms, or are those different things?
Oh gosh, do you have like 10 years to talk about this? I'm just kidding. That was ridiculous. Witchcraft is so difficult to define, because if you go back to the medieval days, it wasn't really witchcraft; it was sorcery. So it's any type of magical act. When you get to witchcraft, it's more about like harmful magic in the early modern era. So counter magic, any sort of magic would have been associated with witchcraft, whether it was good or bad, whether the intention was good or the intention was bad. When we're talking about guys like Cotton Mather, that would have been linked to witchcraft. All right.
Alyssa, have you looked at all for burn marks?
No, I haven't, but I know they find those in the UK a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, those have got to be really hard to identify, because I mean, it could just be a fire. It could just be a fire. No, it's ritual. So yeah, I'm always on the lookout for those, but I haven't really seen any that I'm sure about. Yep.
I came here because I thought this was going to be an interesting talk, which it's been an amazing thing.
I thought you were gonna be like, but it was really a disappointment.
You know, the thing that's wild, I will show you this before I leave, but I've been spending a number of years researching about an enslaved woman who was sent from Barbados to Kittery, Maine in 1719 to be sold on consignment.
Yeah.
And her bill of lading that was done in Barbados, part of it is printed and then you fill in the blanks.
Right, it's like boilerplate.
And they have a ship that's in a letter S.
Mm-hmm.
And the top part of it, it almost looks like a tidal wave going back. But when you start to talk about the daisy wheels, they're like daisy wheels embedded in the top of that.
Really, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That sounds like it might be more decorative.
It could be.
Yeah.
But boy, it's exactly.
You'll start seeing them everywhere. In your dreams, in your nightmares.
But I was going to ask you something like 1719.
Yeah.
And I mean, this whole document, like it's constantly asking God for safety of the ships.
Oh, well, there you go. So
cargo.
Okay.
But it even ends with amen.
All right.
So it's just interesting with what you're saying, that this looks like it's showing up in like an official document.
That's fascinating. I've never come across that. And
I'll show it to you.
Yeah, you'll have to show me, because that's fascinating. Right off, I was like, oh, that's decorative. But when you're talking about, they're talking about religion and the body of it and protection.
Yeah, and,
wow.
And it's 1719. That's early modern.
That's fascinating. Wow. Oh my goodness. I'm so excited right now. Documents. I never even thought about that. All right. Well, you guys have been great. Thank you so much.